Today's video is brought to you by Glass Spider Publishing. Offering a wide range of hybrid book publishing services, Glass Spider Publishing is your one-stop shop for professional editing, design, publication, and book marketing services. Visit glassspiderpublishing.com today to learn more. Welcome back, friends. Today I'm using a 12 by 16 inch canvas board. You can use any size, shape, or type of canvas you like. I have not gessoed this in any way. It's just straight out of the package. Now, a few weeks ago, I did this painting here, and I was kind of expecting everyone to be kind of meh on it, but everyone really liked it, surprisingly to me. So I decided to do another one in a similar style, because in that video, I didn't have any instruction. You were just kind of watching me do the thing. So I'm going to walk you through the process, and while this is a different image, it's going to be exactly the same way and a very similar color palette to that painting. So to start out, I'm using my number 8 Filbert. It's a nice stiff brush, and we're going to just block in all of our shadows and values. Now this is how I paint for myself when I'm painting, so you're kind of getting a peek at that, but I'll try and keep it a little bit more simplified than when I'm doing it for myself. There's a lot of back and forth when I'm painting for myself. I'm loading up with medium. I'm filling my brush with medium, and the medium is going to be absolutely essential to this painting. And it's matte fluid medium. If you're not familiar, there's a link in the video description so that you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm just pulling a little bit of Payne's Gray in. I want this to be very transparent, at least at first. And we're gonna find our horizon, and first, I need to know right about where the center is, and I feel like the center is right about there. So that would put my center right about there. Now, I do not want my horizon on that center line, so I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. Let's go right about maybe here. Just using the side of my brush to kind of scratch that in. And then we can kind of block in our shapes. And I know I'm going to have like some trees on the sides. It's very, very thin, very loose, no hard edges. Remember, hard edges are hard to cover up later. Soft edges can be changed, they can be gotten rid of. All of that. So the softer and more transparent, the better. Now, like I said, this is how I paint for myself. And I've shown you guys kind of bits of it here and there, but I've tried to keep things a little on the simple side, because I know not everybody likes to go back and forth quite as much as I do. But since you guys liked that one, figured I'd show you a little bit more. Now we need to block in where our water's gonna go. And before I just start and like rip it down the sides, I wanna know where I'm gonna end. So I kind of like the idea of the water being all across the bottom here. And I think I want the land to end there on that side. Maybe we'll pull it down just a little farther on this side, just so they're not the same. And now we know where the water is gonna end. We can start kind of pulling out the banks of the water in here. Very loose. Broken lines give us lots of options. And on this side, really narrow in the back, and then it slowly gets wider as it comes forward. All right, there we've got some options for how things are gonna look. So those are our basic shapes. I'm gonna mix up just a little bit darker of a color. It's just a little bit less transparent, still pretty transparent. And we're gonna block in our values. Essentially, I'm gonna take this almost to a black and white version of the finished piece. And this is an area where I tend to spend a huge amount of time in my painting. And I know if you don't paint like this, if you've never painted like this might seem kind of like a waste of time. Am I going to paint it all in, you know, essentially monochrome, only to go back and add the color and everything on top? But it really helps. It helps a lot because now you know exactly what your values need to be doing. You know, if you're just going straight to color, you might not really have a solid idea of how dark or how light your colors need to be. You just see an area, you're like, oh, that area is green, so we'll just plop some green paint on top of it. But when you're working on top of the value and the value says this area is very dark, now you know that green needs to be very dark. It needs to be about, you know, this dark, however dark we've got it on there. Don't worry about detail, but take this almost to the point where you're ready to put detail in. And I went just a little bit too, I didn't keep my values in there. There. Because I want some highlight on the ground. And usually when I start doing these, they just kind of come straight out of my head. I'll just kind of start scribbling until I find a shape that I like. I did start with a bit of an image idea here, though, just kind of based on other paintings that I've done in the past. If you paint in oil paint, you can absolutely follow along and do this the exact same way. I get comments a lot about, you know, that my paintings look like oil, even though they're acrylic. And part of that is because I use the paint in a similar way to oil. Underpainting my values like this. I don't do any blending. So if you have a hard time blending acrylic, this is how you want to paint. But I think it's that not blending and instead layering that really gives it the look of oil. Just pulling out some of my reflections here. These are going to go straight up and down. It's the light from the sky that we will do horizontally in here. But the reflection of objects, we're going to kind of pull straight up and down. I'm going to let that dry a bit because I need to darken it, and some of this is still pretty wet and kind of lifting off. So I'm going to let it dry, and then we'll be back. We're going to take this all a little bit darker, and then we'll start laying in our color. All right, we are all dried up. Let's go a little bit darker. Now, if you remember on the image that you saw at the beginning of how the painting turns out, I've got some tall trees. And my intention as of right now is to have tall trees on either side. But I'm not going to put those in right now because that's detail. So just ignore all of that. We're going to try and get our values to the darkest value that we want in here. Typically, I would probably spend close to 50% of my painting time on this process, the values. But I won't make you sit through an hour and a half of that. Pretty dark. There's still some medium in my mixture, but it's mostly just panes. It's very, very dark at this point. Don't be afraid to get in there and scumble, especially if you're using my brushes. That is exactly what these bad boys are made for. You will not lose bristles onto your canvas, I swear. Get our reflection in there. It's all right if our reflection is too dark at this point, because we're going to add a lot of light colors in there. I'd rather have it be too dark than have you lose it. Now in this painting, just like the last one, I won't be using any like actual white, titanium white. Instead, what I'm going to be using is a color called Titan Green Pale. I bought it in a big tub and just put it in this, but it's made by Golden. But you can see it's just ever so slightly green, kind of off-white. And the other color I'm going to be using is Titan Violet Pale, also by Golden. Now, if you don't have these colors, it's okay. You can just use titanium white or even Golden's buff, Titan buff, or Liquitex's unbleached titanium, whatever you like. But yeah, just white will be just fine. Just make sure you keep a little bit of your other colors mixed into parts so that you almost never have a pure white. That's the goal. I'm sticking with my number 8, and I've got burnt sienna, cerulean blue, and then my Titan green. And it's barely green, so it's not really very green. Don't let the name fool you or make you think it's going to be something else. Again, I'm going to load up with a lot of medium, and I'm just going to pull a little bit of burnt sienna in, a little bit of cerulean blue in, and I'm just looking for kind of a balanced gray color. If it's too brown, pull in more cerulean. If it's too blue, pull in a little bit more brown. That's pretty good. I think that's probably about as balanced as we're gonna get. And then I'm gonna mix a little bit of Titan green into it. It's still pretty dang transparent. And let's start at the top to kind of get some stormy. Ooh, that's a little brown. Let's pull just a bit more blue in there. There we go. Much better. We're just going to get our stormy clouds started. Heavy pressure to lay down some of that paint, and then a light pressure on the side of the brush. Kind of spread it around, get rid of hard lines and brush marks. My brush was a little wet, so I have a lot of brush marks up here. In fact, let's just wipe some of that out. I'm never afraid to get my hands in the paint. Let's throw a little extra blue in there. I just want it to be on the blue side of the gray. And let's work on the horizon. We'll just have this be ever so slightly bluer and a little bit lighter. Still good and transparent. I'm going to go right over everything that's above the horizon. All of these things are above the horizon. So I'm going to go over top of them. That's how we're going to get that atmospheric perspective that makes those things grayer and softer and fuzzy and makes them feel very distant. Let's add a little bit more of our Titan green to that color. Still keeping it transparent. And even more of the green. I'm pretty much just mixing what's on my brush into some green, so it's pretty much Titan green. I know that doesn't look like there's a lot of difference in there just yet, but I'm just going to pick up some medium and just fill in those white spots that didn't get much. I'm going to stick with that lighter version here. The color that I used right here, it's mostly Titan green with just a flavor of that gray. Still transparent. And I'm mostly going to fill in my water with horizontal brush marks. See how transparent that is? I'm not covering everything. If you can't see your other brush marks, then you don't have enough medium in there. Don't worry about those center marks that I made like that. You won't be able to see that later. And let's start laying in our ground here. So I have some green gold. You don't have to use green gold if you like. You could mix a hint of cadmium yellow with phthalo blue. That would work really well. And I'm just using it because I'm not going to get green out of these colors. But I'm not using that color on its own because obviously that's very sour and would not work real well. So a little mixture of these colors here into that green gold. And I'm going to put a hint of Payne's in there because I want it to be super dark. See how earthy and dirty that green is? That's exactly what I'm looking for there. Nice, dark, earthy green. And medium still working transparent. Blend it into those dark areas. Don't keep it separate. If you keep it separate, it's gonna look patchwork. It's gonna look strange. And I know that looks strange right now, but don't sweat it. Sometimes things look really bad before they look really good. That's just how painting goes. Trust the process. I know everybody says trust the process. And so it becomes one of those things you hear or you say and you don't really think about what it means. But what that means is, just things look bad sometimes, and you have to accept that. That's part of the process. If something looks bad and you rush off to try and change it, you're not trusting the process. You're trying to force it to do something, and that's not how it goes. That's not how things work out. If something wants to be really ugly for a minute, then you just let it be ugly. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, this looks pretty garbage, especially with this green here, but I'm trusting the process because I know that it's going to work out. All right, I'm going to let this dry. I tend to let my paintings dry in between every single layer. I am never working wet into wet. I'm always working on top of dry paint. So I'm going to let this dry and then we'll come back and keep going. All right, let's work on the sky a little bit more. fairly neutral gray. I might even add just a little bit of panes in there. There we go, that's a good color. And some medium, gotta get it a bit transparent. And let's work on our stormy color up here at the top. Bring it down and blend it out. It's not covering fully, and I point that out because yours probably won't be covering fully either. I don't want you to get frustrated and start applying your paint too thick in order to cover everything. Let it be transparent. That's why we're adding the medium. It's that building of the layers that gives you the really mature look, I think. The really, it gives you the ability to have your acrylic paint look like oil paint. That's kind of that, you know, heavy, cloudy top over the sky. And then let's make it a little bit bluer. Just kind of a dusty blue. And our white, I'm just going to call it white because I'm using it as white. And if you're using pure white, that's perfectly fine. All right, so a nice dusty blue. We're going to go across the horizon one more time. Over top of our trees that are over the horizon. And it's starting to haze out the trees that I put on the sides, and that's exactly what I want. A little more white. Sorry guys, you know how Mr. Moon is. One more light. Still pretty transparent. All right, I'm gonna go to my 5/8 inch angle, and I wet it in my jar and then I kind of wiped it on a paper towel bit. And I need some medium. I'm gonna get a bit of Payne's Gray. It's not a huge amount. And some medium. Roughly a 50-50 mixture. And let's work on these trees a bit. Well, let's see. That's pretty dry. If your sky color that you overlapped with is still wet, let it dry or hit it with a blow dryer. And I'm going to use the brush flat and just really haze that out. A little bit of medium if you need help getting it to kind of fog out. Light pressure, thin paint. Get a little bit of medium. I did not pick up paint. But you know, that helps grab some of the paint off of your brush and glaze it in. Starting to build some of those distant trees now with that brushwork. Let's get a little bit on our horizon. So just my very thin color again. From the horizon, I'm just going to kind of pull it up. And on the bottom here, same thing. We're just going to work some of our values and start glazing down some of the brightness in that grass. Because I don't want the grass to be so bright. Typically, if I were doing this for myself, I would have started with a underpainting, something that really contrasts this green. So I probably would have done, oh, maybe a bright color. I could have used like neon red. This golden fluorescent red. I like to use this for underpaintings a lot. I know that seems like a really strange choice, but I really love the way it supports colors, especially greens and neutral colors, as weird as that may sound. So I don't usually have to deal with such a bright ground like that, but it's perfectly fine. Just kind of glazing it down a bit. And this is just Payne's Gray and medium. You'd think Mr. Moon had never had attention in his entire life. Poor neglected kitty. Keep it nice and dark right where the land meets the water. That's going to help kind of pop the land up off of the water and give it some mass. I think I am going to start adding some trees, but I'm not going to get crazy with it. And the reason I'm going to start adding them is because when I go over the sky again, it's going to kind of glaze those trees down, put some mist into them. Sticking with my 5/8 inch, I just picked up a little water. And I'm going to use the tip of the brush. I'm going to hold it very loosely. I'm just going to put the tip of the brush on the canvas, just like that. Not the whole edge, just the tip of the brush. And we'll start down in here. Let your hand shake a little. That's why we're holding it far back. Takes away a bit of control. If I'm holding it here like this, I'm going to get these really, really sharp, artificial looking lines. I'm even kind of letting the brush roll a little bit in my hand as I go. Don't make them the same height. I feel like these ones are a little more distant, so they're not going to be as tall. You want them to be different than the other side. Maybe we'll just make it one tree that kind of splits. Just scratch in some little lines here. They'll read as distant trees. Still just using the very tip of this brush. Let's get a few of those over here too. Very light touch, almost depositing no paint. All right, we're gonna let this dry again and then we will come back. All right, continuing with the sky, let's really get in here and start lightening some of this up, sticking with my number 8. A little bit of sienna, more blue. I don't want to look at it and see blue in the sky, but I want it to appear bluer here than here. So I am going for kind of a neutrally mix. And let's get maybe a bit more of the Titan Violet than we have been using. Just a bit of medium. I'm not going to go quite as transparent this time. Just smooth out some of those brush lines. Notice I am kind of starting to avoid the darker areas. So I made our masses darker in here, so I'm not taking this over that. Not too much. It might overlap it a little bit. Definitely overlapping those trees. And let's go lighter. Just grabbing some of that Titan, pulling it in here. A bit of medium. So it's almost pure Titan green, but it's just a little dirtied. Blend it in there. See how those trees that we did in the last bit, they're starting to fog out into the sky. That is exactly what I want. Just gently scumbling some of that over this area. Really push these guys into the distance. Starting to look much, much better. This area right in here, I kind of feel like is going to be the brightest part of the sky, but it's going to have these looming clouds over top of it. And I'm going to do something a little different in there. So I'm going to leave that for now. Let's move on and kind of bulk up this. So we're going to go a little bit more of an even mixture, brown and blue. Just looking for a fairly neutral gray. And I think I will put a hint of pains in there, not a lot. All right, some Titan. Bit of medium. Let's just see, this might be, oh, I think that's actually pretty good. I'm gonna lay it in a little heavier up here to try and start losing some of the thinness. I can still see everything underneath it, but I want to get it to have that smooth, solid look. Now here, where it meets up with our lighter color, remember when we did the clouds in the Valley Storm video, how I kind of used the tip of the brush like this to create cloud shapes at the top? I'm doing the exact same thing, but kind of upside down. So I don't want a perfectly smooth blend where this color meets the next colors. I almost want cloud tops just on the bottom. And if it helps you to flip it upside down, go ahead. But I don't want you to spend too much time and effort trying to make it look like cloud tops. Basically, I'm just saying it's not a smooth blend. There's going to be a little bit of kind of a cloudy shape at the bottom of this darker color that we're doing. Just pressing flat to get a little extra paint off. And then up to the side and the tip of my brush to blend smooth and shape. just picked up some medium, almost kind of blending it down a bit. All right, I've cleaned off my brush. I'm gonna get a bit of medium and I'm gonna load up with just Titan Green. I did pick up a little bit of whatever's hanging out there, but it's not a big deal. I apologize, my dog is trying to save us from a man who came to do some work on our house today, so she may bark here and there. So I'm just gently filling in this lightest area with just the Titan Green. If you're using titanium white, I would just dirty it up just a little bit. Don't use pure white here. As I start reaching up to this cloud area, I'm gonna start kind of doing the nudgy thing up into it too, just to kind of maintain that look of, you know, a separation between the glow in this distant sky and these heavy clouds coming down from the top. And this is not my final color here, so you don't want to get this color thick. Keep it nice and thin. At any point, if your paint is too thick and completely covers, you're gonna lose that kind of oil paint polished look. I think it gives it a polished look. Maybe that's just because I'm biased, but I think that when acrylic paint is, you know, applied pretty thickly and covers in one coat, as acrylic paint can do, that's one of the things that can make it look like acrylic paint and less like, you know, something like oil paint or just a little bit, just a tiny bit more professional. I'm barely touching the canvas, just using the flat tip part of the brush and streaking out any lines with my fingers. Need just a little bit more of that over here. My brush is pretty wet, so I'm getting a lot of paint even when I'm trying not to. I'm going to take it almost all the way to the edges. That's pretty good. Let's see. That's pretty dry. I'm gonna get a good amount of medium and just mix it with what's in my brush. I'm not picking up more paint. I'm only picking up medium. I'm just gonna kind of glaze this a little bit. It's very, very faint. I know it looks more opaque, a little bit lighter as I'm applying it than it actually is, because remember that the matte medium looks white when it's wet. So anything you mix it into is gonna appear a little bit lighter while it's wet, but once it dries, it will become more transparent. That was just a little dark for me up there. All right, I'm going to my number 6, and I'm just gonna load up with Titan Green. I'll probably thin it down a bit, so let's make it a bit transparent. I don't know, you're probably not gonna be able to see this in here because this is pretty much Titan, but let's see, I'm gonna go right about in the center. Maybe not quite the center, that's off just a little bit, but it's kind of centered with where my river starts. I think I like it there. So, if you need to use a stencil or something to get a circle, you can do that. I'm just gonna freehand it. But I'm gonna fuzz out the bottom half. Only gonna have a crisp line on the top, which can help you if you're having a hard time getting a perfectly round shape. You kind of soften it out on the bottom. You can't tell quite as much. Just tapping the edge there. Yeah, I don't even think you guys can see that, but it's okay. Just picked up a tiny bit more Titan. Just gonna make sure that I don't lose that edge, that top edge, later. So don't worry about that not showing up real well. That's kind of a placeholder. We will make sure that it is nice and obvious later in the painting. All right, I am really eager to work on the water here, especially back here. This water looks really, really terrible, but I just feel like I need to nudge the sky a little bit closer to completion before we do. So let's continue there. I'm sticking with my number 8. I did wet it in the jar and then I wiped it on a paper towel. These brushes hold a lot of water, so you do want to kind of wipe them off. And I feel like I've just got, it's just a little harsh up here. I like the difference between the two, but I need to kind of tamp this down a little bit. So we're basically gonna glaze it down a bit. So I'm gonna mix up my grayish color. I'm not gonna add any pains to it this time though. Golly, got a lot of brown in there. There we go, that's a little better. And some Titan green. It's just kind of a dirty Titan green. It's pretty much, it's almost pure. It's just barely got a little bit of that gray in it. And we're gonna mix a good amount of medium, so it's a bit transparent. All right, I'm kind of glazing this. In fact, I'm not even gonna scumble it like I started doing. I'm just gonna glaze it down for the most part. The darker color felt a little more transparent, and to me that was weird. I didn't like that, so glazing it with some of this opaque color is going to fog it out a bit, and that is exactly what I want. Just kind of smoothing it with the flat of the brush. I've got the entire length of the brush on the canvas. Get down in here. Don't be afraid. Don't keep it separate from the lighter color. If you're getting a lot of brush marks, like I'm getting quite a few brush marks, but I know that if I try and go over them, I'm just gonna get a brush mark in a different direction, or I'm gonna work the paint too much and lift it. So I'm just kind of letting those brush marks be right now. I'm kind of ignoring them. Now that this has had a second to dry, I am just going to go over it again, just real quick, super light touch. Just get rid of those brush marks. Just in a little bit of a different direction from the first time. That looks much better. All right, I'm going to pick up just a little bit more panes. I didn't clean off my brush. It's still got that same mixture. I'm just making it a little more opaque and a little bit lighter, but I don't have a ton of paint. I'm going to go on the edge of my brush, and I'm just kind of touching up where these colors meet. I'm not trying to blend them in. I'm just touching it up a little bit. Kind of had like a weird hole going on right there, so I had to get rid of that. Very light touch. Just kind of lay down a little of the paint with the flat of the brush, and then up on the side and a light pressure to kind of nudge it, blur it out, push it into other areas. Much better. This is looking pretty good. Just going to do a tiny bit more of this to kind of change up the shape of our upper clouds, and then I'm actually going to be really happy, I think, with where the sky is at. And I think I'll leave it for a bit. Let's work on our little moon there for a moment. So I'm going to go to my number 6, and on my palette here, I've put out Titan Violet Pale, and you can see right next to the green how they differ a little bit in color. If you don't have either of these colors, like I said, it's fine. You can just use titanium white. I would just maybe mix a little bit of some color in each one to kind of shift them a bit. Maybe this one's a little more blue, and this one's a little more brown, or bring in another color, whatever works for you. All right, so yeah, I think you can kind of see where my moon is there. Now I'm gonna start out with some of my Titan Green. And I'm gonna mix Titan Violet into it. And we just get a really pretty, slightly glowy color. It's gonna be just a little more, it's gonna glow just a little bit more than the background here. So I'm gonna start at my top edge. See the difference there? It's very subtle, but that's what makes paintings like this work, is subtle. You don't want to go overly bright, overly different. I think subtle is what makes paintings like this so exciting. So I just did that top edge and then kind of smeared it out with my finger. Might add just a little bit more. I'm going to use this violet in the water quite a bit as well. Kind of leave the bottom faded out. Helps the scene feel misty. One more little blip of that kind of right in here. Remember, just like with clouds, think beyond the outer edge for the highlight. Here I'm kind of pulling the highlight onto the interior, not so much on the outer edge. Just dab to soften that a bit. And I think I'll let that sit, and we'll decide later if we need to add or change anything about that. All right, so I think we'll leave our moon or sun, or however you interpret that for now. We might come back later and change it a little bit, but we'll see how we feel after we've done some work on the rest of the painting. For now, I think I'm gonna start working on the ground, and with that is gonna come working on at least this back part of the water, because it needs some serious help. All right, I'm gonna go to my 1/2 inch angle, and I wet this in my jar. And let's start by mixing up some of our brown blue, heavier on the side of the brown. Just kind of a grayed down version of that burnt sienna. And we'll throw some green gold in there. That was an extra lot of green gold. I don't think I want quite that much. Throw a little bit more of each of these in there. That's better. And then we're gonna just punch it with a bit of pains. Knock it down just a little bit. There we go. We want to be able to see it, so I'm just going to get just a little bit of my Titan green, mostly just to nudge it back to opaque. It was pretty transparent there. Concentrating this to where I know I want to see the highlight, but feathering it out into the dark areas, because I'm going to glaze those down and get rid of anything I don't want. But I don't want to have a highlighted stripe. So that's why I have to take it out into the areas that I know I want dark, because there'll be a nice kind of a gradient between the two. Even here, I'm going to kind of dust it up into that dark area, because I don't want anything to be pure dark. You know what, maybe let's pull this little clump of trees here. Let's pull it a little closer to us. And one way we can do that without repainting everything is by putting some light behind it. So let me show you what I mean. I'm using the same color, but I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna put just a little bit of this color back here behind this clump. I know that looks really strange right now, but I think it'll work out, and if not, I'll just paint the dark back over it. But I think it's better to experiment than to stick with safe stuff. Let's throw a little more blue in there, because this is going to be much more distant. We're gonna start kind of reshaping our water back here. So this, to me, it looks like it's moving uphill or coming from uphill down. And there's a couple reasons for that. I've been asked for some perspective lessons, so here's a little bit of some perspective for you. We can see the top surface of this piece of the water. We can see the top surface pretty well. Not much of it is obscured. And that tells your brain that it's angled toward you like that. Another thing that's telling us that is how smooth and kind of open these curves are. See right here, it feels flatter because this is a very sharp curve. So to flatten this out, we need to sharpen these curves and obscure some of this top, and that will press it flat. All right, so let's just kind of start working on the shape and obscuring. So I'm cutting into the water with sharp shapes on both sides, and right there, that needs to go. You could see where that disappeared. We don't want to be able to see that. We'll pull some of the water this way to soften it. All right, let's see how that does. Let's darken it, get a little bit of some of the shadows in there. And we can get rid of that bit where it was too high in the distance. See, it still doesn't look great, but it reads flatter in the distance now. We've pushed it down a bit, and it's still just a little wide right up in here. I'm just going to cover it with this dark. We wouldn't really see the dark right there too much, but maybe we'll just pull some dark out here. Really obscure that distance. There we go. That is much flatter than it was. Much, much better. Let's keep that dark color going. I'm just really picking up pains. A little bit of medium. Let's work some of our shadows. We will have the water moving into there, like I said, but right now it's not there. I'm just going to ignore it. Let's fix up this shadowy area that we kind of changed a bit. Kind of glaze down some of this. Once we start doing the water, which we have not done, the water is nowhere near done, then kind of the shape of the land will make a little bit more sense. But I'm not in a hurry. Just remember, keep it nice and dark here where the land meets the water. Just gives you some volume. before we move on to the water. I want to work the trees. The water is kind of my last thing. I'm not really going to work on the water too much until the end. Just getting some of that dark into the base of the trees again. Get me some medium, because we need to make sure we don't lose, that was too much. We don't want to lose all of the like distant stuff here, the distant trees, and they're super fogged out right now, which is exactly what I wanted to do. But I need to bring back just a bit of it. So this is really thin down with medium. That is looking so much better. Okay, still dirty brush. It's got lots of Payne's gray in it. I'm gonna grab my blue-brown mixture. We're gonna go back into our green. I'm gonna gray it down quite a bit. It's just kind of barely a brownish green. A little bit of Payne's to open that color up. Or not Payne's, I'm sorry, the Titan green. Open that color up so that you can see what's going on in there. And then we're gonna dust in a bit of our highlight color. I might wanna move down to a smaller brush here, but let's just start and see what happens. That's not actually light enough. Still don't think that's light enough. There we go. You know, that's almost too light. But you have to think a step ahead when you paint like this. If you aren't thinking a step ahead, you'll think, oh, that's too light, and then you'll darken it. And then when our next part comes and we want to glaze this area again, to kind of bring all the colors into harmony, then it's going to be way too dark. So right now I'm okay that it's too light because I know I'm going to glaze it in a bit, and that's going to darken it. Very light touch. I don't want to overdo the light color back here, but I want to make sure that I don't lose my distant ground. Having just a little bit of light in the far distance really helps make your paintings a little bit more dynamic. If we just have everything in the distance fade out into black, that can be fine, but it kind of closes up the image. When you've got a little bit of light there in the distance, it makes it seem a little bit more, I don't know, I feel like it makes it a little bit more professional, because a lot of times when we paint as amateurs, we kind of forget about that ground. We've got our way back distance, the sky, and we've got the ground in front of us, and there's not a lot of in between. So I am definitely making sure to at least get something going on back here, a little bit of light. Let's just do a little bit of work on the water since we're here and we've got the angle brush out. So I'm going to start off with, let's see, which way do I want to go with this? Let's intensify the shadows real quick. So I'm just going to pull out some panes, bit of medium. It's about 50-50 mixture. Maybe let's add a little extra panes to that. And I'm just going to kind of amp up some of the shadows here. Nice and dark where it meets the land, and then streak it down. Go a little bit overboard with these reflections because we are going to paint the watercolor next, and we're going to lose quite a bit of this. So it's okay to go a little overboard. A little bit of a thicker mixture. I want to kind of obscure where the land and the water meet. And yeah, I almost completely obliterated my water back here, and that's okay. There's plenty of time to add highlights back in. All right, let's stick with that 1/2 inch angle. I'm gonna mix up a little bit of my blue brown. Might keep it ever so slightly on the bluer side. And some Payne's gray. So it's just a very gray color. And let's get a little bit of our Titan green. I don't want it too dark, but I don't want it too light. Let's see how that works. Oh, that's way too dark. That's a little bit better. And we'll streak it up and let it blend a bit with that shadow color. I think I might change my brush actually. I don't think I want to use this angle brush. I'm gonna go back to my number 8. All right, let's try this. Pretty good. Just let it blend in. Let's go ahead and lighten it as we move toward the center. Need some over here. And this dark, the reflection, that color is dry, so I'm not blending. It's just overlapping, and then I'm lightly scumbling. All about the visual blends, not about the actual blends. Not worried about the bottom of the canvas, just worried about kind of getting a blend here with this lighter color. Let's go one lighter. Right here in the center. Kind of right below our moon sun thing. Whoops. Just got a little messy there. But as always, a damp brush gets rid of it. All right, let's work on our trees. So I'm gonna stick with my angle brush, and I'm just gonna get some Payne's. Let's mix it in a clean spot here. And I'm just gonna add a tiny bit of water instead of medium, and that's just because I want the paint to flow smoothly. Let's go ahead and start on our trees over here. So, just using the tip of the brush again, just the very tip of the brush. If you're concerned about making an ugly branch that you need to get rid of, just keep a a damp, clean brush nearby. So I'm going to kind of go over a couple of these that I already did. But it's okay if it's not exact, because it'll feel like it's got branches that are moving out that are maybe a little bit hazed. Just using the very, very point of the brush. Can you see that? Just the point of the brush. Just get those shapes back in there. And then we'll do long liner for everything else. And over here, I'm going to drop down some of this paint first and really darken it up. This is going to be my main clump of trees, so I want it to be very dark around it. And then a light touch to just kind of fuzz it out the top. Even just a little point of medium, that really helps. All right, now our trees. So because this is our main clump of trees, the trees over here are going to be a little bit bigger. So this is my primary tree, putting a little extra pressure on the brush, letting it wobble a bit. Let's widen it out at the base here just a bit. And I think, you know what, let's do this on the distant horizon. I'm going to grab a little more medium. Let's go pretty transparent. Wipe a lot of that off so it's a very crisp line. Maybe here on the horizon we'll give a suggestion of a few very, very distant trees. I think that's pretty good. As well as some kind of foliage stuff. We don't want the horizon to just suddenly end. I like to be able to, or not be able to tell where the horizon ends and where the sky begins. I really like an ambiguous kind of transition there. Just some little dashes like that. Maybe it's kind of indicating the tops of some distant trees. Darken that. We don't want that to be an exit point. Don't know if I love that lighter bit back here after all. At least right there. Let's just get rid of it right there. I think that's better. And we can pull this down just a bit. Let's start on our small trees over here. And I'm going to my long liner. I've wet it in my jar, and I'm going to start with some of this transparent-ish paints. There's quite a bit of medium in there. It doesn't matter. You could use solid paints if you want. Little extra water so that the paint flows nicely. Remember, these brushes, it can be really hard to get much of a line off of them because they don't hold very much. So if you add a little extra water, it will go a little bit farther. I'm going to hold it far down at the end. You don't want to crank down on it like this. You're going to get too sharp and too aggressive of tree branches. So I'm going to hold it out here. I'm going to let my hand shake if it wants to. And I'm just going to kind of start. Just kind of back and forth. Look how delicate those branches are. But when we start, because I've got the most paint, you want to start as close to the trunk as possible. If you start out here up at the top, you're going to have a really fat, thick branch. It's a very subtle effect, giving us very thin, very delicate branches. We do want some that are a little bit thicker, so with a bit more control, I'll put on a couple of thicker ones. Maybe widen this tree just a little bit. Oop, that was maybe just a little tall. There we go. And same over on this tree. Oh, I kind of like that little unintentional whoop. My brush kind of poked flat, and it almost looks like a bird. At the cemetery where we walk our dog Freya, there's always like a big crow sitting in the top of a tree, like right at the very top. It will make him a little bit more intentional. Just darken that shape just a little bit. I like that. And let's just make some other little scratchy shapes in here. Maybe they're distant, maybe they're just very young trees. I'll zoom you in here in a second so you can see up close kind of how this went. I think at a distance there you don't see exactly what it looks like. There, so you can see how scratchy and thin most of those branches are. All the way down. Very scratchy and thin. And all the way up, and there's our little bird. It's just a simple transparent dot, really, with the brush. I just want to do one more little bit at the bottom here. Especially off of this wider tree. Just really kind of breaking up that trunk. It just felt so stark. I might glaze it a little bit later, we'll see. All right, onto this side. Still just my long liner. Nice and flat. Get that tree kind of worked out a bit. It's okay that this one's a little bit darker. I intentionally did not mix this paint quite as thin. I didn't add any medium to this side. So these trees are going to be a little bit more substantial, a little more solid. Some of these brush strokes are so delicate and thin, they almost just look like a hair. And that does take some practice to be able to, you know, have that kind of pressure control, but you can do it. I believe in you. Just get a piece of paper or something, your long liner, and just practice that. Just practice your pressure. And I promise you'll be able to do it. Let's give it a little bit of an extra branch here. That's maybe just a little bit more substantial. We are way too tree trunky down here. So I'm just gonna kind of add some swipes that kind of hide it. I don't like to see real solid trunks right there. I still have that over there, so I think I'm gonna do that too. So I'm gonna kind of swipe some of this and like it to look a little overgrown. Let's even maybe pull this tree trunk just down just a little bit. Maybe we can see it right in here. It's a little bit closer. Just give it a little shadow at the base there. And you didn't see that. It doesn't really matter. All I did was pull this down just a little bit farther and then kind of go like this to add a bit of extra shadow there at the base. In fact, let's keep doing that. I really enjoy that technique. So let me show you what I'm doing. I'm still using my long liner, a little extra water to make it flow, loading up. It's just pains. Roll some of it off. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna lay the brush flat somewhere. So like that. So the entire length of the bristles are on the canvas. I'm just gonna flick up. See that little shape that it made? It's just a flick. So, wherever I wanna say, like maybe there's some grasses or something. And dash out the bottom a bit. And there's a little bit here. Just kind of breaks up the shape a bit. That scrape you hear is the ferrule actually rubbing on the canvas. I don't want to go overboard, just some, just here and there. Just gives a little extra texture to the ground. Because maybe there's some long grasses or something growing in there, some weeds. And we can even pull it out into our water a little bit. The river might not be very deep. Maybe there's little bits of grasses that are growing up and out of the water. Just don't forget to streak out the bottom. All right, I think we are actually almost done. I need to finish up the water, do a little bit extra with the highlights and the grass, and finish the moon. So why don't we finish the moon, because that is going to inform how we finish the water. I'm gonna go to my number 3 round, and I'm just gonna get a little bit of Titan Violet. Just my Titan Violet. Maybe a little bit of medium in it. And again, I'm really just kind of doing this top edge. And not even the full top edge. And I'm going to wipe some of that in. Yeah, that pretty much looks like it's kind of fading into the atmosphere beneath it. That's exactly what I wanted. I think that moon is good. I don't think I'm going to do anything else to it. So I think I'm ready to finish up the ground, but this is just a little stark for me. So back to my angle, just some Titan green. Drop it over here, good amount of medium, nice and transparent. Nice and transparent. Do not go overboard with the green here. And we're just gonna kind of glaze a bit of this out. Very light brush strokes. Wipe at it if you get too much. almost feel like that is good enough. Don't want a lot of it. All right, I think that looks good. Let's go ahead, punch our highlights here, get our final glaze, and finish our water. All right, to work on the grass here, I'm gonna go to my little number 8 Filbert. And let's punch some highlights, and then we're gonna do a glaze to kind of bring it to the color we want. The reason I'm doing that, glazing, instead of just painting it the color I want, is because sometimes it's really hard to get vibrancy in kind of these grayed down colors. It's hard to get vibrancy from mixing. You know, once I add in any kind of white, the vibrancy is really reduced. So we're just going to focus on the value for the most part, and then we'll glaze some colors over top of it later, and that will give us the vibrancy that we want. So just kind of a warm color. Some of my Titan Violet. And let's see how that does. That might not be, oh yeah, that's perfect. Perfect, perfect. I'm gonna mix a little bit of extra medium in there and wipe some of it off. I don't want a ton of paint. I'm just gonna focus this where I know I want the brightest areas in the ground. Kind of angling my brush strokes here. Makes it look like the ground is kind of swooping upwards. One last little burst of brightness just kind of in the spots where I feel like I want to make the viewer look at these spots and kind of wish they were standing right there. And so one of the ways I'll do that is by making that area the brightest. One more little glaze over here, and then I'm going to let this dry. Remember that when you glaze over top of other colors, you need those first colors to be dry. All right, while that dries, let's finish up our water. I'm going to go to my number 3, and let's see, just a little bit of our blue-brown. A little heavier on the blue than on the brown. Tiny bit of pains. And the green, Titan green. But I want this to be fairly light, pretty light. That's a good start. Let's finish up our distant water in here. Now I know I lost a huge amount of it, and that is perfectly okay. I'm just gonna highlight little bits. See how I kind of pulled that over there? It's gonna make it just a little bit more pointed. Help make it feel just a little bit flatter. Just gonna kind of nudge in some little highlights. It just tells you that the water goes off into the distance here. Even if you can't really see it too much, you know it's there. For the most part, so far anyway, I'm keeping my brush strokes horizontal. I think you can go either horizontal or vertical, but what you don't want to do is start doing a lot of, you know, like random scribbling or angles. That will throw off your perspective a bit. That's pretty good. Let's just get a little bit of just the Titan green. Barely touching in here. Pretty good. I'm going to grab a little bit of my Titan Violet and mix it in there. It's about a 50-50 mixture of the two. And it doesn't look all that different, but on the canvas, it's really going to make a difference. Just like when we did the little sun or moon, however you choose to interpret that. That's why I love these two colors together, the violet and the green. All right, I'm going to go back to my long handle number 8 Filbert, and let's get kind of a slightly grayed down color like we used before. I'm just mixing up a very similar color to what I already used back here. There we go. That's pretty good. All right, a little medium, maybe a little more medium. Coming straight up from the bottom of the canvas and letting it blur with some light pressure at the top there so that it blurs into the other colors. Might be a little light for this corner, so I'll kind of stop there. Maybe let's darken it up just a bit for the edges. Much better. That works. Just get a little medium. My paint on my brush is getting a bit dry, so it's getting canvas texture rather than a blend. All right, now I'm going to go just right into the green, the Titan green, and I think that's good. Let's stick with that for right now. Just the Titan green. I'm going to come down straight from my light source. You know, in my other painting, I went horizontal with the light reflection. Something about this one feels like I want to do it vertical. Whatever works best for you, whatever you think looks best for your painting, it's perfectly fine. Let's throw some horizontal and see if that's doing the thing. I don't feel like that's going to do the thing that I want. Back to vertical. It's been a few days, my paint is starting to dry out. I've just been keeping my paint underneath like a plastic bucket when I'm not painting, but after a while it dries out. Got a little paint booger in there. Let's get that out. Remember, just with the tip of your brush, scrape into it, and that removes things like that. I'm going to go back to my number 8 short handle. Load up with my green, and then I'm going to throw some of this violet in there. About a 50-50 mixture again. Directly under my light source. You might need to let that dry for a bit. It's getting kind of messy. Did some more little horizontal lines and really hate them. So a little bit of medium and a light touch over them. When your paint starts to be pulling off of the canvas like mine is, it's time to stop. So let's let that dry for a few. Just please remember, when it starts pulling up off of the canvas and leaving these weird holes, it is not going to get better if you keep trying to touch it. You're gonna keep pulling more off. It's gonna get worse. So when that happens, even though it looks like garbage, leave it alone. Let it dry. We'll come back and it'll be an easy fix. Let's go ahead and glaze our ground. I'm gonna use my 1/2" angle. Let's get a little bit of our brown, a little bit of our green gold, which is, oh man, that is really drying up. Ooh, super dry. Some medium. Maybe let's throw a little blue in there. Nice and vibrant. That's a really pretty color. I love the way the burnt sienna and the green gold work together. A little more medium, nice and transparent. See how vibrant that is. And I am going up into the darkness. It will affect that as well, even though it won't be as dramatic. It'll just keep it from being, you know, black. Let's throw a bit more blue in there. A little bit more of our brown because that tones down the blue. We're looking for a bit of a grayer color. I don't want it to be quite so vibrant for back here. Just gonna go right into some panes. I did not clean off my brush. Maybe let's throw a little bit more brown in there, because I want to maintain a bit of shadow, and then I think we're probably done with the ground. So here, where it goes from dark into the light, I'm going to glaze. Make that light a little bit more special. All right, I think I'm gonna stick with my angle. Let's see if we can get this water done. So I'm just gonna dirty up my brush with whatever's going on here. And lighten it with some green. Tone the green down with some violet. There we go. That is pretty much exactly what I was looking for. Make it a little thicker there to cover that ugly hole. Straight up from the bottom. Now I'm going to go right into the violet. My brush is still dirty, obviously. It's mostly violet. And straight down from our light source. Very little though. This color is special, so we don't want to overdo it. Medium. I think that's pretty good. I just want to add a tiny bit of it here. I like where it's coming out of the Little flowy river part. And I think I'm pretty happy with that.